welcome to our webinar on the lovely topic of is ESG sustainable? And I will just now share my screen before we kind of go into the introductions. Hopefully then soon everybody will be able to see my screen. Great. Well, I mean, I have to say we've had unprecedented interest in this topic, and I think also it's a testament to the range of different job titles and so on as how absolutely on trend this kind of topic and conversation is. So welcome to our webinar. There's opportunity to ask questions down in the either the chat or Q&As, so feel free to ask as we go through, and we'll either try and pick them up if we can as we go through the presentation. And we have also allowed for Q&As towards the end of the session, so you'll have two bites of the cherry, so to speak, to ask any questions you have of the panel. As I say, welcome. We really thought it was a great opportunity to talk around the topic of ESG and sustainability. We get asked about it by so many of our clients and how the best way is to communicate it. But before we kick off, I thought it'd be good to introduce the team. Myself, I'm Richard. I'm Chief Digital Officer at Black Sun. I'm really responsible for our kind of digital solutions as an agency for all of our clients, really making sure that we communicate effectively through digital channels. Anne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Anne Kirkby. I sit in the Insight team at Black Sun, and I work with clients on a number of different projects in relation to ESG, in relation to communication more generally. I come from a background I come from an ESG world in the sense that I spent a decade in the city as an ESG analyst and the last 7 here at Black Sun. James, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Yep, I'm James Whittingham, Sustainability Director here at Black Sun, also a colleague of Anne in the same team. And my background is 20 plus years of both in-house and advisory work, having worked in FTSE 100, FTSE 250 businesses as a sustainability practitioner. And I support clients on their sustainability communications, sustainability consultancy solutions and reporting. So look forward to speaking with you.
And last but not least, my name is Dan Cowley. I'm head of digital strategy. So I spend lots of my time working with clients about how we articulate the value creation story and thinking about how we can align that with things like sustainability and ESG and bring them all to life online.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So the agenda today is, we had a record interest. So I think we had over 400 people registering for the event, which is unheard of almost in our event. So as I say, a real hot topic. So I'll just do a couple of slides introducing Black Sun for those of you who may not be familiar with us. But we'll quickly get on to the content area, and Anne's going to take us through, what we see as the real kind of ESG versus sustainability challenge. What's the differentiated purpose of each of those? What's the wider kind of sustainability and ESG communications imperative? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll deep dive a little bit more into each of the areas as to what good looks like. So what's the best way and the most effective way of communicating ESG and also sustainability? And then Dan will really bring it to life around, how we can communicate that through corporate websites, because clearly corporate websites addresses all of your different stakeholder groups. So there's lots of nuances and different ways that we can communicate that through the channel. And then finally, we'll open up for any Q&As that we have from you. But we thought it might be interesting, though. Allow me. I hope the technology will work for this well. But what we thought we might do is just kick off a little bit of a poll. It's only a couple of questions, so do bear with us. It's really about how you might keep up to date with information around ESG and sustainability. And also, we thought it might be useful to ask you, what areas you might like to explore more on that topic area. So feel free to, please. Answer the questions in front of you. Hopefully everybody's seeing it on screen. I'm looking for some nods. Yep, that's great. Thank you. The results are coming in, and I will share the results once we get them. But hopefully this will also help us, shape through the presentation as we go through it. So just give a couple of minutes for that. Getting lots of responses. Thank you, everybody.
Some very key trends are developing straight away, Rich, which is really interesting.
Yes. Okay, just wait another kind of few seconds for responses coming in. They're coming in pretty fast, so I'll leave it open for a little bit. Excellent. Thanks, everybody. So I'll end the poll now and I will look to share the results, if that's okay. Here we go. So hopefully people can see that. Yep, great. So the first question was, which sources of information do you rely on to keep up to date with ESG and sustainability news, trends, and so on? And you can see the answers here. So obviously, quite a lot around ESG specific newsletters, but also around the regulatory bodies and national media, which is good to know. So hopefully you all find that useful. And then in terms of the, which areas you'd like more information on or hear more about, actually, again, an interesting TCFD is, I would definitely say, is a hot topic with all of our clients. I'm sure Anne and James would concur with that one. And materiality assessments, we've done quite a few this year with our clients. So again, that resonates. But again, hopefully that helps, I guess, give sharing to all of you as to what's on other people's minds. And if there are any questions, if you go through that, and I know obviously Anne can take questions around raters and rankers and so on. So do feel free to ask as we go through, but this will really help shape any further information that we might share with you. And at the end of this presentation, we will, of course, share the slides that we're going through with you today, just to make sure you've got the information to hand. So you can focus on listening rather than scribbling notes, which hopefully will be useful. So I'll stop sharing that. What I will do now is just, if I may, introduce a little bit to Blacksun. For those of you who don't know us, we are an international stakeholder communications agency. So we really help organizations, articulate and better communicate how they create value for their different stakeholder groups. And we're real strategic storytellers, led by insight, driven by creative, and really powered by technology to allow our clients to communicate effectively with their different groups. And frankly, if we get the inspiring strategic communications right, we can spark positive change and long-term sustainable performance from businesses. And all of that wraps to basically help businesses be more valued by the different stakeholder groups. And the three areas, key critical areas that we articulate and deliver communications through. Firstly, stakeholder reporting. So everything from annual reports, sustainability reports, TCFD, and so on. Sustainability communications, naturally a rapidly growing area of our business over the last kind of 2 or 3 years. Both kind of sustainability reporting and campaigns, materiality assessments, and so on. And thirdly, with damn good offices, around digital transformation. So really helping our clients transform how they communicate through digital channels. In terms of our insight, we're led by insight, and it's worth just saying, we have obviously the consultants that you've got in front of you, experts in their fields, but we also do research the FTSE and the best practice for client organizations across reporting, sustainability, and websites. And we'll share some of the latest trends with you later in the year when we've done our latest benchmarking assessments, which we're just gearing up for this year. And we also help obviously shape the reporting debate through the associations and relationships we have, Sally being on the IR Society, good relationship with the FRC and so on. And as I say, provide benchmarking best practice consultancy to our clients. But critically, obviously, work with our clients to really understand their audience needs and focus on their communications needs. And you'll be delighted to know, I'm not going to go through all these, but just so you have it in the pack in front of you when you share it with you, we do provide a suite of consultancy services across sustainability, ESG, and of course, digital. So really working with our clients to do best practice communications and reporting. And for many of our clients, we work in an integrated way. So just a couple of examples here, Coca-Cola, Lennox, HBC, look after their corporate site, country sites, integrated annual report, help support their sustainability communications, some of their internal communications, so a rich tapestry of communications. And we really help our clients better articulate and deliver consistent story across these different channels. Similarly for Direct Line Group, and of course more recently with Associated British Food and Compass Group. Just to give you a kind of if you like, a vignette of some of the clients that we work with across these areas. It's a really good experience of helping clients solve some of these ESG, sustainability, and communications challenges. But I have to say that's probably enough about us. I want to hand over now to Anne. And Anne is going to take us through, how we see some of the challenges that clients face, when thinking about ESG and sustainability. Hence the title, obviously, of the event. So Anne, I'll hand over to you now, and we can crack on to the next stage of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Rich. So first off, I thought I'd just start us off with a little bit of a background around what we've been seeing over the last couple of years, which has really been sort of an unprecedented seismic shift in stakeholder capitalism, in how sustainability has really crept up that agenda, and that's also then impacted regulation. It's impacted reporting regulation, and it impacts a number of different but sort of very distinct separate streams. Next slide, please. Which at its heart essentially has a long-term value creation story. It goes to the heart of viability, of corporate viability, and all of these stakeholders who are now more empowered than ever are both having an opinion but are also themselves being impacted. And I think one of those stakeholders, next slide, please, is obviously investors. And I think it's fair to say that investor focus around ESG has really exploded over the last 5-6 years, and as evidenced by how assets under management in terms of ESG mandates has grown and exploded really, but also how the green bond market has really increased, as well as other sustainable loan types, etc., which all feeds into the same ecosystem. And I would argue, and I know this is sort of slightly controversial sometimes, that investors have the widest lens when it comes to sort of sustainability, ESG, etc., and that actually ESG is wider than sustainability. And that's sort of my argument throughout this presentation today. And really, they look at a number of things that goes to that viability, right? So I've set out some of those here from, it's not just about sustainability. When they think about ESG, it goes to, customer decision making. They worry about, consumer sentiment. They worry about employee retention and attraction, punitive regulation, reputation, credit ratings. All of those sort of things fit into the same bucket, which, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, is less likely to be the case for if you look at sustainability as a standalone bucket. I also wanted to just obviously set out the disclosure universe as we see it at the moment. This is by no means complete, but it just gives you a little bit of a insight into what is it actually. It's really, really very crowded. It's just growing. We have seen obviously some consolidation in the last year or so, but we're still seeing more pop up. And I think it's fair to say sometimes we talk about them as this big mass of things, but obviously they are very discrete and separate categories, right? From reporting frameworks to transparency initiatives, the rating agencies, the indices, etc., etc. So a lot of different elements, and not just one alphabet soup. But I also think this is where it sort of starts being a little bit interesting. Some of them are very much ESG focused, and some of them are sustainability focused. And I would argue that those are two different things. The ESG lens, and if we get to the next one, Rich. The ESG lens is wider in the sense that it will look at, so here we have, I've set out MSCI's sort of topic network, and I've set out the same for Sustainalytics and FTSE Russell. And you'll see some of those things that turn up here, like say, for instance, InfoSec and risk might not necessarily be functions or sit within the sustainability function, but may sit within, entirely different functions within companies. So I'd argue that ESG is wider from that perspective. Next slide, please. In fact, if we look at it a little bit closer, what is it actually the difference is between ESG and sustainability? Well, from an audience perspective, obviously ESG, we're talking about investors, analysts, rating agencies, etc. Whereas the audience for, I would say, sort of more, sustainability is more a wider audience around customers, employees, communities, etc. The approach is different, whether it's about, essentially a risk management and opportunities view from an investor perspective, or from a sustainability, which is, doing well by doing good. equally, the purpose is different. You know, from risk mitigation in the ESG lens to the sort of reputational and wider lens in sustainability. And the sort of the benefit of serving those different stakeholders, and that's different. Those different approaches are also obviously different. Rich, next. When we then look at it from a how should we communicate to these two different streams, if we choose to call them that, ESG and sustainability. The ESG is very much focused around, I would say, disclosure focused. So data policy focused, you know, it's perhaps the drier contents, the drier communication modes, you know, they don't necessarily appreciate the beauty, you know, the beautiful curation of narratives and key messaging. You know, quite often it's about harvesting information that can go into ratings, that investors will then take that information, maybe not even the actual score, but just the information, and feed it into their own proprietary systems, which they will then overlay with their own engagement and agendas and their own themes, etc., etc. From a sustainability perspective, it is, you know, that sort of the mode of communication and needs there are slightly different as well. You know, it's much more around storytelling, and it's much more around, you know, the key messaging, understanding the societal impact, environmental impact, etc. But of course, still needing those proof points, you know, to make sure that it isn't all about greenwashing. Next one. So how do we then deal with this from a communication of topics perspective? Well, I would say there's sort of a set of elements that are common for both groups, whether it's from sustainability or from an ESG perspective. And I think those common topics are the sort of the middle column you can see there. You know, everybody wants to know the approach that a company has to ESG sustainability, right? And particularly is it based on a sort of a materiality assessment. They want to know about the strategic pillars, the commitments, the targets, and the performance against these. They also want to know about, you know, human capital management, if that isn't part of sustainability strategy, which for a lot of companies, it isn't. It sits as a separate function, isn't part of the sustainability strategy. They both want to know about net zero roadmap, and they typically want to know a little bit more about the value chain to understand the context for the strategy, to understand where the potential risks are, to understand really whether there are particular opportunities for the company. But that's where the commonalities stop. ESG aspects really focus, as we talked about a little bit before, policy download. I cannot stress how important this is. You know, a lot of companies are already publishing some policies and some are not at all. And there's various reasons why companies don't publish policies. Maybe they haven't been through the same scrutiny as you know, their internal policies as other policies. There might be different reasons, but I cannot underline how important it is for the ESG score that those are made available. You might also want to have information around ESG ratings for reporting frameworks, etc. Whether that's SASB or similar. You also want to be talking about governance, providing that ESG data, which isn't necessarily so interesting from a sustainability perspective. The commercial opportunity, really important from a rankers and raters perspective, or perhaps even more so from an investor, because at the moment, I guess I'm sort of, I'm painting them as one. And there are obviously investors, and then there is ESG raters and rankers. And when I say investors, I talk primarily around active investors. They perhaps will be even more interested in the commercial opportunity aspect of it, which the rankers and raters won't always pick up on. When I say commercial opportunity, oh, thank you, Rich. I was being too slow there. I would say there's a couple of things you need to be also considering here, which is around, say, governance. For instance, companies tend to talk about governance as the governance of their sustainability approach. I would say that is obviously really key, but there's also, we sometimes talk about the big G versus the little g, the governance as in board independence, board skills, remuneration, etc., is very key part of that aspect. And so is, elements like you wouldn't necessarily imagine being part of sustainability, right? Like data security, for instance. Purpose is also important to stakeholders, to investors, to the degree that it impacts culture or impacts sort of the long-term viability, how they operate. And on the other hand, the sustainability part of the picture is obviously more, in addition to the commonalities and sort of the middle column there, it is around the purpose and role in society, how the company can have the biggest possible impact and is having that impact, the values and culture, the sort of the perhaps more volunteering, philanthropic element, and also any additional disclosures. So it might be specific disclosures that are relevant to sort of single issue NGOs or special interest groups that you might also need to disclose that might not be part of your sustainability strategy, but boxes you need to tick nonetheless. Richard? So from I talked a little bit about how, because ESG is quite wide, that means you need to actually engage quite a lot of functions within your company. It doesn't just sit with sustainability. Responsibility doesn't just sit with sustainability. So I've sort of tried here to set out a little bit around the functions impacted. So really, from an ESG lens perspective, that would be the sustainability team, the health and safety team, the risk team, the governance team, the human capital team, the compliance team, the infosec team, the finance team, increasingly also teams like, the strategy team, the business development team, etc. Whereas from a sustainability perspective, we are still, placing the responsibility on them within the sustainability team, perhaps corporate comms, health and safety, and human capital, if that is part of sustainability strategy. For both of those, finance is sort of the newer function that's come in, as it obviously becomes clearer that the financial impact of climate change, for instance, is something that companies are having to report on. So in summary, I would say that we need to be looking at these as two different things rather than using the term ESG and sustainability interchangeably. They are two different stakeholder groups. They have different requirements in terms of what the information they need available, how they should be communicated with, and who owns the particular topics. I think, ironically, you could argue that while we are currently in a situation where we have to deal with these two stakeholder groups differently, over time, this is an evolution, and over time, it will very possibly become one thing. Which is just business, right? It'll become so integrated into everything that we do that we won't have to have a single team who has responsibility for it.
Thanks, Anne. And we've got 2 or 3 questions already in the session, so that's great. Thank you very much for that. A couple I'm going to just pick up towards the end of the next couple of sessions because they're relating to specific communication questions on sustainability and so on. So I'll pick those up in the Q&A if we haven't answered them through the next couple of sessions. But Anne, James, I don't know which one of you wants to answer the question that says, what do you think of the impact of ISSB will be on companies moving forward, and what should companies do in the meantime? Is there a quick answer on that one, or should we save that for the Q&As?
Well, I can tell you that we're writing a blog right now about ISSB, which will be going out very soon, which might provide some inside track. I guess the consultation is live for a few more weeks yet, so I think there's a need to probably review it in detail, perhaps consider responding if you're a corporate or a listed business. But ultimately, it's going to put more work in the in-tray of the preparers of this content. That's the simple answer, I think. And obviously, there's quite a lot of work going on within this sort of reporting space to harmonize and bring together some of these frameworks as currently demonstrated. So that's just a short answer to say, watch this space and look out for a blog that we'll be publishing very soon on that.
Great, thank you very much. That's great. And I think we're also going to host an ISSB session with Vice Chair Sue Lloyd coming up soon, aren't we, as I recall. But Thank you for that, and thanks, Anne, for that info. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, how, as you say, they're kind of rooted in the same kind of pedigree and the kind of the seismic shift we've seen over the last couple of years, particularly around kind of more purpose-led, long-term sustainability-driven organizations, but they're actually addressing very kind of different, if you like, content and audience type needs. So should we dive further then into the next kind of topic area? And look at how we can communicate effectively from an ESG perspective. And then on the second session, James will pick up how we do the same on sustainability, which will hopefully give people good clues on to how to communicate effectively.
Fantastic. Yeah, if you can start us off. So I thought I would just set out a little bit around how to effectively deal with disclosure frameworks and how to deal with rating agencies, and then move us on a little bit to talk about some of the different approaches we're seeing to how companies are communicating. And the first one here really is around how to deal with disclosure frameworks. Again, I've just put in some of the disclosure frameworks. Don't see that as the only. There are obviously many disclosure frameworks, but I think it's very key that companies know their investors, know their stakeholders more generally, not just their investors actually, and understand which of these are appreciated, because no one can tick the boxes with all of the different disclosure frameworks. And some take an awful long time that you have to invest in it. And if it's not appreciated, that is a waste of time. So prioritize, align with the industry. Are there, if no one else in your sector is aligning with a particular framework, and or everyone else in your sector is, and you're the only one out, that's key should be key to your considerations. So the effort, we talked a little bit about that. How much you actually have put in versus how much is it appreciated, and I think actually overarching from that is I think a lot of companies don't necessarily reach out to their different stakeholders to find out who's using what's most relevant to them, how do they want it served to them, and sometimes that is a little bit like finger in the air. We think they do, or we've always done this, we've done this for 20 years, we must continue to do this. Actually reaching out and doing those that exercise of engaging with your different stakeholders to find out if it's needed. And finally, and this is really key, to map your disclosures, to make sure that the disclosures you have that align with your different frameworks sit either standalone or they sit in a place where you'd be able to find them, so that it doesn't get deleted off. Can you get to the next one, please? So raters and rankers. I would say here that, again, know your investors. Are your investors which ones are the rating agencies are your investors using? Are they just using it as they take the data, or do they actually look at the scores at all? Do they just take the data and feed it into their own proprietary systems? Are there actually elements that would be, do you just need to actually spend some time on getting to a certain level with some of these raters, and actually the rest of your time on communicating particular things that your specific investors are looking for? You should also obviously keep an eye out for what is publicly available. So some of this information, top line scores for Sustainalytics, for MSCI, and for some of the others are also publicly available. So it doesn't mean that the whole assessment is publicly available, but it does mean that the top score is. So you can go in and see what your peers are scoring. You can go in and see what everyone is scoring. And I think that's a bit of an eye opener for companies. Make it easy to find. Sorry, Rich. Making it easy to find, and think about formats. Do we put it in one place? Do we spread it everywhere? From a little bit on the website, a little bit here, a little bit there. And if we do it that way, do we have somewhere where we can explain that breadcrumb trail to the rankers and raters who will be looking for this information? Or do we have an addendum where we have all of this information in? Again, you need to be prioritize your disclosures based on weighting. So for each of these raters and rankers, there's a particular, for each data point, there's a particular weighting. And there are some data points that will be much more valuable than other data points. And actually going through that exercise and identifying which ones they are is really crucial. And actually another one from that I mentioned before, which is around tracking your disclosures, making sure that you know where those disclosures are, where they sit in your reporting suite, on your website, etc., so that they don't get, deleted inadvertently by someone who don't realize that it's actually an information point for a ranker or rater. So I wanted to just set out a little bit around reporting formats and what we're seeing. So at the moment, most companies have an annual report, an integrated annual report, and perhaps a sustainability report. And I would just say around integrated report and integrated annual reports is that obviously we've followed companies that have gone from one report to two reports, annual report sustainability, to then an integrated report, and are actually seeing a lot of companies having an integrated report and a sustainability report, because when you have an integrated report, you tell the holistic story, but a super summary of the holistic story, which means you don't have the level of detail that is needed to actually fulfill the requirements of rankers and raters, for instance. So there's a couple of different options that companies can take. And I've sort of tried to set them out here. Some companies, and we're seeing actually that's perhaps a sort of micro trend at the moment, is dumping it all into the annual report. So they have an integrated annual report, they might have had a sustainability report, they might have had, fact sheets, etc. before, dumping it all into the annual report. And that makes that document, easy to find information for rankers and raters, but incredibly dull to read. From a communication perspective, it's terrible because, the balance of information is off. From a materiality lens, is information sufficiently material and proportionate to the other information in the report? If you have 2 pages on your strategy and you have, 108 on sustainability, you probably have got your balance wrong. But there are also other options in terms of annual reports versus, using your website much more, or alternatively having a suite of different reports that serve different stakeholder groups, so that way that you fulfill the requirements for each of those stakeholder groups, while at the same time keeping the annual report or integrated annual report a succinct story that does touch on everything that is crucial, also from a ESG and sustainability lens, and then sends people on to other elements, other reports or website. I won't spend more time on this, but I would just, very briefly cast your attention to some of the next slides we have, which is a couple of different formats. So we have here Tesco sets out some fact sheets trying to deal with particular issues that stakeholders have. It's also very easy from a way of sort of maintaining this. You can both maintain it not just on an annual basis as you would with an annual sustainability report, but you can do it on a more regular basis. You can, it's not a sort of very beautiful communication, so you don't have to think about messaging, etc., etc. It's fairly easy to update year on year. Next. Elements such as, an SR addendum, where perhaps you include all of the disclosures from a rankers and raters perspective that you don't want to pollute your annual report with, and equally some of the other ones, Rich, which is, I've got here AT&T, who sets out they split the story by stakeholders, so to speak, with a reporting suite that both talks about, we've got a performance glossy, we've got a summary glossy, we've got fact sheets for each of the topics they want to be they need to be talking about. They have a policy download, so they're sort of trying to actually fulfill the needs of a large number of stakeholder groups. And finally,
over to me. Okay, thank you very much, Anne. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the requirements from our knowledge and experience of the building blocks for a sustainability report, reporting and disclosure. So from our knowledge, experience, and working with clients over for many years, we've sort of outlined here what you might call some of the key building blocks to help you think about your sustainability reporting. There was a question in the chat a short while ago along the lines of, I'm just getting started, how could I start? Well, this is a really useful way of starting to think about what sorts of information you might need. And arguably, this would be applicable in an annual report, within a standalone sustainability report, possibly even the content that you might put on your website. But I don't want to steal any of Dan's thunder, and he's going to be speaking directly after me. But the only thing I would draw out from here, rather than go through one by one, is that probably item number 6 and item number 7, often they are very interlinked for obvious reasons. And also, perhaps if a company is just starting out, they may be the areas that are underdeveloped and require or will require more attention in due course. But what underpins all of these underlying principles, as it were, is the necessity for authenticity, for transparency, and also for accessibility. So those are really important, and you need to be able to tell, the stories about what's worked well, what you're going to work on next year, what you might do differently. Stakeholders need to have an appreciation that you're on a journey towards improving the quality and the breadth and depth of your sustainability content across your reporting channels. And if we go on to the next slide, please, Rich, thank you very much. So I wrote a blog about this, published a couple of months ago, and that very much talks about the building blocks. And that's a good articulation of how you can use those, how they can provide a roadmap, really, for help improving the sustainability story. It's only a 5-minute read, but it will help to articulate and bring to life some of those key points that I made. So if we go on to the next slide. So what I've got is a couple of examples from sort of first-year reporting, and then I've got 2 or 3 examples from more mature reporting as well. So if we go to the next slide. So Logicor published the first sustainability or ESG report in 2020, and they started off with around 20 pages. As you can see from my remarks before about the building blocks, they've talked about some of the emerging trends. They've talked about their roadmap, how they're going to create positive change over the longer term. But I think it's probably worth noting that, if it's your first report, it could be, it could be 6 pages, it could be 8 pages, it could be 20 pages like Logicor did. It doesn't have to be, right, let's work out a pagination plan for 50-page report in year 1. And I guess where we see our role here at Black Sun is about being an extension of your team. If you don't necessarily have the subject matter expertise or the bandwidth in your team or teams within your organization, that's where we can really help to play a vital role, to be an extension of your team and to be on your side. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. I've got another example. So Sage, you may know them, they're an accounting business. They have technology solutions, software as a service to help organizations improve the quality of their disclosure around their financial reporting. And so this is a good example as a first-year report. So it's around 40 pages. Very much they use the E, S, and the G as a means to outline their report and reporting and their structure, with people being almost like a 4th pillar. So it's a good first report about how, like it says in their title there, about how they've been using their business to knock down barriers. You've got an introduction from the CEO. You've got a good articulation of what their material issues are. So it's a really good sort of first report that was published last year. But obviously, there's a lot of companies that have been doing this type of stuff for many years. And so if we go to the next couple of slides, please, Rich, we can look at some of the more sort of mature examples. So Tesco has been an example here. So they've got a whole reporting hub where they've got their report, they've got methodologies, and it goes going back to some of the things that Anne was talking about. You've got to try and make it as easy, as simple as you can for your different stakeholders to find what it is that you need to communicate, whether that be data, how you respond to indices and benchmarks, fact sheets. So we're increasingly seeing this as a useful way. If the pagination doesn't necessarily lend itself in your annual report section, for example, or your standalone report, to really do a deep dive on an important topic, whether it be your responsible supply chain activity, or climate change or water use, other impact areas, then the fact sheets is a great example about how you can elaborate and articulate and do a deep dive on a particular subject. And also SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, it's a standard that's increasingly being used, and there are different categories for different business segments within commerce. Then this is a good way of being able to properly not only produce your tables, but then to provide a narrative as well. And there may not be space to do that necessarily in your annual report or even your standalone SR. So having that hub is a great way of showing everything there and easy to find and navigate. And if we could go on to the next example, please. So Rio Tinto, again, everything is there. It's the extent that they've done a deep dive is not so much a fact sheet, rather, that they've created a sustainability fact book. They've also got lots of information, lots of data. They're in the minerals, mining and extractive sector. And they've got, as we're increasingly seeing, a standalone climate change report as well. So TCFD, as Rich mentioned, a lot of our clients are now getting to grips with that properly for the first time. And we've already been helping clients from across a number of sectors in this space this year, as they realize that there is increased interest and requirement to disclose around not only about how they manage risk around climate, what the opportunities they see, what is the governance, the metrics and targets, and the scenario analysis, etc. And I've got one more example to show you before I hand over to Dan. So Associated British Foods, so we supported this client in the last 12 months, and they've gone down the fact sheet route again because they saw the opportunity to really tell deep, do a deep dive on different subject areas. They have their responsibility update. They've got content around health, safety, and well-being, but it's all complementary content. It's all there, easy to find in that portal. And there's, there's a real opportunity to grow that content as new and emerging subject matter becomes available. So that was a very quick canter through the sustainability reporting. But just finally, I guess this is something, if you're embarking on a sustainability reporting project of some description, whether it be content in your annual report, content on your website, or a standalone sustainability report, you need to ask yourself some of these important questions. And one size is not going to fit all for your stakeholders. So I guess it's about understanding who are your key stakeholders from the outset, and they will have different reporting requirements. One format might not be the right one for one particular stakeholder. It may not be different. So complementary reporting, taking a multi-channel view is absolutely key, and also understanding about what capacity you have in your team to be able to publish this perhaps all at the same time or staggered throughout the year. You get additional sort of your day in the sun for that report or that piece of disclosure than you would do if you published it all on the same day. So lots of different things. So these are the kind of questions that we'd be asking our clients when we'll be having a briefing conversation at the start of the process. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to Dan, who's going to give us some examples from the digital space. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, James. Really useful. So I guess coming back to those myriad of audiences and thinking about kind of the different lenses we look through, it's important to understand what we're talking about when we're articulating kind of that value creation story, thinking about what audiences are looking for, and how are we communicating things in the right way, in the right place, and at the right time. If I think about the taxonomy and the language we often get asked around, it's this differentiation between ESG and sustainability. And it's understanding how we can make it as simple as possible for users to understand and easy to find, as James has just said. Those unique lenses means that actually there's probably more understanding around sustainability than there is around ESG. If you ask specific audiences, whether that be B2B, B2C, B2B would probably understand it a little bit more because it's a phrase that's being used increasingly. Maybe consumers might not. I asked my father if he understands what ESG is before I present here. He says he doesn't. So therefore, do we need to think about how we articulate the language and the messaging to the different audiences, and bringing that to life online is really the core of that in terms of how we develop that narrative and understanding each of those key priorities in terms of each of the groups that we're talking to. Rich, on the next slide, we'll look at kind of what that actually means. So what I wanted to do today was give you a tangible recommendation for what we see as the way that you should move forward with how you communicate ESG and sustainability through a digital lens. Because ESG is predominantly that investor element, thinking about how you can shape those key decisions around kind of sustainability content and acting as a conduit. I see it as a lily pad. It's a leaping point to take you from one to the other around the messaging. So our best practice principles with ESG are to incorporate that within the investor section and to have a page that's located directly in there called ESG. That should include things like disclosures. It should include things like the recognition and performers, the raters and rankers, and all the different elements that guys have been talking about so far. And also things like alignment to purpose and business strategy. So again, you can start thinking about what it means for the wider business and why it's incorporated. If you look at something like sustainability, more generalized in terms of the detail, thinking about the wider audiences. So again, a standalone section, maybe in the navigation, so it's easy to identify. And what we've seen increasingly is sustainability maybe moving up the agenda, almost across the page, as it were, from being right on the far side to closer to the about us, maybe even in advance of it, showing a priority of what's important. And then thinking about that overarching approach, thinking about the messaging, materiality, why these things are important, but also then targets performance, stakeholders, proof points, case studies, all of that great content. So ESG can link through to that, but sustainability is still a standalone location for what we're looking to kind of do. Dare I take the presentation away from Rich for a few minutes and just show to you a continuation of the examples we were just showing. You hopefully should be able to see the ABF examples. If I look at the panel for a nod, I will double check. Thank you. So what the ABF have done, as James was alluding to, is create a great destination for content. So if I then go into the investor section, I've got a standalone ESG page here, thinking about recognizing its obligations to society, what they're trying to do from a kind of a value chain point of view. They set their messaging out very clearly in terms of what they're trying to do to become a better business, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And they align then relevant kind of content to it. So in our supply chain, we are doing these. In our operations, for our people, whatever those obligations were in terms of it not just being about risk management, but it being about fundamentally how to be a better business. They also then link things through like ESG investor days, obviously the content around the annual report. So there's relevant sections and documents that they're linking out to, whilst also then providing an overview of the ESG performance and the raters and rankers we mentioned to. If I then look at what I'm interested in, linking directly off to responsibility, and I've mentioned purpose already, so I can then go straight through to this section. And if I just show you the navigation for a moment, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about when I've got then approach, the focus areas of what's important to them, things like stakeholders, and again, aligning with those ESG insights that James showed you earlier. But again, it's providing it with the right lens that says, okay, we're linking to this from the ESG page, and we're also providing everything else you need from a sustainability point of view. So it's not just ESG, it's the wider context. Burberry do a really good job as well at this in terms of incorporating an ESG page within their investor section. Again, just navigating through to that, simple and easy to find. This is really kind of a simple approach of showcasing how content can work without maybe the bells and whistles, thinking about how it aligns with purpose, the heritage, the history, and also then thinking about maybe disclosures, what it means for the business and where they're trying to get to, and then looking at things like the recognition and again, Sustainalytics and all the other raters and rankers that are there. And then what they do is they link off then to other pages within their sustainability section, such as the people environment. And if you look at then that section, again, they've got the approach, they've got their focus areas, they've got their policies and their context. The last example I just wanted to quickly show to you was the ESG example on BP. And I think this is a great example of, again, aligning with purpose and ambition, as you can see, being net zero company by 2050. Clear links on the right-hand side to the ESG investor pack. And then, interestingly, they're talking about how their sustainability framework governs the wider approach to these issues, but it also then aligns with what they're trying to say from an ESG point of view. Senior management buy-in, we've mentioned that a few times in terms of examples, and then providing references to the reporting suite, the events, the presentations that they've done, and how they're promoting ESG through their latest news and beyond. Rich, that's all from me.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Thank you, obviously, for the collective presentation. I think what we've tried to do is to share with you I think some really good examples around, how we see the different kind of content and audience priorities across ESG and sustainability. In fact, they are rooted, if you like, in the same kind of need and drive for kind of purpose-led, long-term sustainable businesses. I think we also saw from James, how you can actually evolve that through the life and the cycle of, how your reporting evolves. And Anne has covered off, what the raters and rankers look for, what the priorities are for investors. And hopefully we've shared with you, from what Dan has shared with you, around how you can then implement that in a cohesive way in a website, addressing those different audiences and content needs and priorities, but doing so in a consistent and joined up way. So, what I would like to do now is just pick up on a couple of questions that people have popped into the group, if I may. I think let's start with a nice little, shall I say an easy one, which I think was, it was around whether fact sheets, James, it might be more for you around kind of fact sheets and whether that specifically helps raters and rankers, I believe it is, or maybe Anne, you want to pick that one up? I think that was the first question.
I think I'm going to defer to Anne on that one for raters and rankers.
I mean, I would say it's not something rankers and raters specifically asking for, but I think it works well in the sense that if you were to include the minute level of detail the rankers and raters are often looking for in your annual report, or indeed in your sustainability report, you lose all opportunity to communicate, and it becomes a disclosure exercise. So that's where fact sheets are really helpful in providing that level of detail.
Brilliant, thanks, Anne. The next question I thought was, let's pick up that, which was, I think we answered it to a certain extent, but if there's anything anyone wants to add around, effectively scaling it to the available budget, there are people obviously that, may not have the budget around, say the BPs or the people and resource, dare I say it. So James, I think you gave it a little bit of a flavour, but is there anything either you or Anne want to add to that from a kind of a reporting and communication viewpoint?
So is this the question about if you're just starting out, what key things should you be thinking about? Was it that?
Correct. Yeah.
So I alluded to that in the short presentation that I gave. I guess read our blog again, look at the building blocks, and obviously we're going to share all the slides on at the end of the session. So I guess if you've got the thing about sustainability, and this is something that I alluded to in my blog, is that it's a requirement to really break down those silos, break down those walls, and to create a very collaborative, collegiate environment for producing the necessary outputs. And as Anne put on one of her slides, this content is going to require input from lots of different people. So I think if you're very much doing this on a budget and perhaps with limited resources and time, then at least try and gather a group of people who are going to be the key gatekeepers of that information, either producing it, creating it, and ultimately signing it off. So the typical people will be people from finance and company secretary, from risk, perhaps from external communications, internal communications. So those would be some of the major stakeholders. But I guess it's to look at some of your peers. It's a really good first step to do, is to look at what some of your peers and competitors are doing in this space and see if you can derive some ideas and inspiration from them in terms of, well, what are the key chapters, the key sections of a report that they may have created and reported on. I mean, you can't just magic up your materiality work. I can't re-emphasize enough that it's the key building block for your sustainability or ESG strategy, is working out what are your key impacts, issues, and risks, and that should really form the bedrock for your strategy and for where you would put your emphasis on your reporting and disclosure, and ultimately your objectives, targets, and goals.
And I guess what you were saying in terms of the website and the structure that you shared with us, I think what that showed was probably it's scalable for whatever kind of point you are in the journey. Would that be right? Would you adopt a similar structure across Dan?
Absolutely. And I guess part of our role here at Black Sun is about working with clients and working out where they are on that journey, working out their level of ambition, and try to provide support, guidance, and creative content accordingly. And everybody's going to be at a different point of that journey. And if suddenly, if you're the sustainability manager or you're the director of IR, you get a tap on the shoulder from the CFO who says, right, we really got to respond. We've really got to then, perhaps suddenly budget and doors will suddenly open. But yeah, we're here to help you navigate through this landscape and to work out what you need to do, when and how.
Cool. Thank you very much. Dan, anything to add from a kind of a web perspective?
No, I think it's a really interesting kind of challenge what James was talking about there in terms of working out how you cut your cloth accordingly. I mean, what I've shown you is some examples of how you can create an ESG page that acts as that conduit, as that linking point. But a lot of our clients have also asked us, you know, can we make ESG into sustainability? And I think that's where the whole discussion of what we've talked around today is around how they, if you think of that Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlapping, but there are these elements that just don't quite fit into one or then the other. And it's understanding how we can make sure that the audiences understand where they're clicking, what they're looking for, and how we then get them the information. So things like the fact sheets are great because you can then allow them to download information quicker if they want the deep dive. If they just want the case studies and the high level information, they can find that as well. And that's what we're trying to do with our model. It's thinking about those different access points for the different audiences to make sure they can find exactly what they're looking for quickly and efficiently, because otherwise they won't engage and they won't then look for things and they won't read the content.
Thanks. We had a very specific question, which I'll just throw out to the group, which is, how do you see the need to specifically call out activities that did not go well or targets not met? What's the right balance between this and calling out successes? I don't know who want to take that one on.
I'm happy to. I think this is really key. I mean, I think if companies provide enough context around why something, you know, it probably you didn't achieve those targets because you sat back and did nothing. It is possibly because of a resource constraint or a people constraint or a COVID constraint or all sorts of different reasons. And I think as long as you contextualize that, I don't think it's a problem. I don't think, you know, your stakeholders will see it as a problem. But I think sometimes companies are not very good at saying when things don't go right, when targets are not met, it's toned down, or the theme of the report is something different that year, or, you know, the emphasis is moved. So I think it's really key. And I also think from an investor perspective, those companies who are not afraid to say they didn't meet their targets and explain why, you know, by and large, companies, investors are reasonable people who will understand why that is, and will perhaps even appreciate the honesty and the sort of authenticity of owning it. So I think you definitely must do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right, thank you. Great, so I think we covered most of the questions. I guess I just wanted to wrap up a minute to go or so, just to thank everybody for attending the webinar. I do hope you found it useful. As I say, we will share the slides after the event. And I think the other thing clearly to say is, you know, if you've got any questions around, you know, your website or, you know, your delivery of ESG or sustainability communications, very happy to talk to you further. You know, whether that be from advice and guidance, whether it be some consultancy work or just, you know, reviewing your communications and seeing what good looks like, we'd be very happy to do so. Do reach out and talk to us. Hopefully we'll hear from you soon, but thanks again for attending the event. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.